Hi, I'm Danny and these are my Diecast Disasters, and in this video I'm going to be using some files that I've downloaded from Thingiverse and a Hot Wheels 32 Ford hot rod, and I'm going to be making the Elvis from Mad Max Fury Road. So you can see here's the slicer for my Anycubic resin printer, and I've set out all the parts for our Elvis and printed them. So this is how they come out of the printer. You can see they've got all the supports on them. I had to reprint the engine there with the supports in a different position. So next I clean off all the supports. You can snap them off mostly pretty easy, and then just clean up with some sandpaper and a little needle file. I had to further tidy up a couple of parts. You can see, for instance, underneath the chassis there, it's a little bit rounded, so I'm just going to flatten that off with my file. And now I can start assembling it. So there's the rear diff goes in here. I just use a drop of thin Starbond super glue to stick it in place. So next is the front axle part. That sticks on a little notch in the front there. And unfortunately it ended up breaking. Applied a little bit too much force, so I had to cast it again. And this time, to prevent it from snapping along those thin beams, I'm going to be gluing a couple of pieces of thin styrene sheet that I've cut out, and hopefully they'll reinforce it and stop it breaking this time. Again, using just a couple of drops of the thin super glue. Right, so you can see where the piece of styrene is going over those little notches there, so I'll just cut those out with my craft knife. And now I can start assembling it again. So the rear diff, another drop of glue, and the front axle wheel bearings and stuff. And there's a gearbox to glue on underneath. And then finally there was the radiator grill glues on the front there. Okay, so that is the chassis assembled. I'll just put that aside, and now we can move on to the body from a Hot Wheels 32 Ford hot rod. And this is left over from one of my other projects, I forget which one. So the paint is stripped off. Next I'm going to take to it with my Dremel, and I'm going to cut off that scoop there on the front and also cut out the rear boot. Next I use some styrene sheet to fill in the boot there and make a little platform. And then use my drill to drill a couple of holes in the rear of the cab of the Ford. You can see that fits on there like that. And I'm going to be able to put a little piece of styrene rod through to make the rear guards there. Both those holes are a little bit too big, like too big for that styrene tube. So here I've glued on an extra piece of styrene on the rear there, because I thought the rear stuck out a bit too far as well. And I'll just cut that little sticky out bit off the back there. Next I mixed up a little blob of epoxy putty, and I'm just going to filler those holes on the rear of the cab. There we go. Right, I'll let those cure, and then I can use a little tiny drill in my pin vise and drill a couple of really small holes in there. And they're pretty much exactly the same size as that small styrene rod, so it'll be a nice cozy fit. Alright, there's the new holes. I'll just give that a clean up with some sandpaper. And you can see now it's a nice snug fit for that piece of styrene tube. And I've also drilled out the same two holes on the rear of the chassis there. Right, now I can move on with some painting. So I give the car body a base coat of silver. Next I gave it a coat of orange brown. It's just from a rattle can. And then from the bottom up a light coat of a darker brown, just to give it a bit of shading. Here I'm using orange rust and German red brown and a sponge just lightly over the body here and there to give it a bit more variation in the rust. There we go, that's starting to get a nice looking patina on it. I had to use a cut-off brush to get in the little 90-degree angle there, and the boot was a bit tricky with the sponge. I sort of shaded that a slightly darker rust as well. Right, next I'm going to put a black pin wash in the door panels and sort of shade it out a little bit so it looks nice and tidy. And I'm using a Vallejo black model wash for this, as I find it stays water soluble for the longest. And you can sort of do more shading and messing around with it. And for a last touch, I'm going to dust the whole thing with some Vallejo rust pigment before I fix it with a matte varnish. And here it is, finished with the clear coat on. So I'll put that aside and move on to the chassis. It was given a black primer, and then I hit it with a base coat of silver. Next it was lightly airbrushed with Vallejo rust texture. We could use a dark matte brown. I'll put a black wash over that. Right, next I detailed the little guy inside. I think he's meant to be wearing a jacket or something, but the war boys all had bare top halves, so I've just painted them flesh colour. Can't really see in there very well anyway. A sponge is used to apply some more rust all over the chassis. And again, I'll just finish this off with some of the rust pigment dusted all over it before a matte clear coat. Okay, so there's the chassis all good to go. And you can see the Hot Wheels 32 Ford body just fits on there nice and snugly like that. Starting to get somewhere now. The guards are glued in place at the rear, and I painted them with a gunmetal and a black wash. Here's the engine all assembled. Paint this, it was given a black primer and then a coat of silver, and then all I did was applied a black wash over that. And here's how that came out looking. Don't need to do anything else to that, as the engine in the original car is quite clean. And glued that in place on the chassis there. Now I can move on to the wheels. So I've given them a good clean up from all the supports and stuff, and I had to drill out the holes in the larger wheels and clean out their sort of cone-shaped notches in the smaller ones, just so that they fitted onto the hubs a little bit better. And to paint them, they were given a base coat of black. Then I painted the rims silver and applied a black wash. And once that was dried, I could use a cut-off brush to apply some rust to them. There we go, that's looking alright. Do the rest of them, and then they were glued on to our Elvis. So we're nearly there. The next thing it's going to need is a roof-mounted machine gun. So here's a machine gun I found on Thingiverse, and I had to model the little mount myself because I couldn't find anything similar enough, and that's getting pretty much the limit of how small my printer will go. So you can see I've assembled it there and glued it onto a skewer, and then I hit it with some black primer and detailed it with gunmetal and a black wash and some brown for the handles, and then of course I broke it, so it was so delicate, so I had to make another one. And to paint this, I left one of the supports on so I could hold it with my forceps. So there's that glued onto the roof. And finally, to finish it off, I've got a couple of pieces of really thin styrene rod, and these were glued on to the rear there for those big bendy sort of aerial things, whatever they are. And to make the little things on the end of them, I used some epoxy putty, and I made some little tiny blobs of it, and then I could glue them onto the end of the styrene rods. And so that is about that. There's nothing really to look at for a before image, so we'll go straight to the finished article. And here it is, our custom-made Hot Wheels Thingiverse Mad Max Elvis. I think it came out looking pretty good. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'll leave the links to the files I used in the description down below. You can try making one yourself. As always, a big thanks to my awesome Patreon supporters. Thanks for continuing to support the show. I really appreciate it. If you want to help out as well or get some cheap super glue, you can check out the links in the description down below. There's a link to my other channel. And thanks to you for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more similar stuff, remember to like and subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications and stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.